The World to Come tells the story of two women who find unexpected love in the harsh, isolated American frontier. Get ready to dive into this powerful tale of Abigail and Tallie, whose forbidden romance challenges everything in their 1800s world. What happens when duty collides with desire? Let's find out. In the harsh winter of 1856, Abigail begins her journal with a stark observation of her reality. Ice forming inside their bedroom for the first time all season, the frigid air seeping into every corner of their modest farmhouse. The water freezes on the potatoes as soon as they're washed, a chilling reminder of the unforgiving cold that grips their lives. As she steps onto the porch after sunrise, the only sound is the low chirping of sparrows buried in the snow-covered hedgerows. It is a world both silent and unyielding. Dyer, her husband, is a man who believes in perseverance, convinced that good health and hard work will always yield prosperity. Yet he carries an invisible burden, a weight he cannot seem to shake. He confesses to Abigail that contentment is like an old friend he never gets to see, a sentiment that only deepens her own quiet sorrows. Their farm, their livelihood, is meticulously documented in his ledger, each crop and transaction recorded to ensure they can see the year whole. At his request, Abigail keeps a diary, not of feelings, but of tools lent out, bills outstanding, and other practical matters. Yet she knows the pages will never hold the most significant moments of their lives, their deepest fears, their greatest joys, their most piercing losses. One such loss defines her days. Their daughter, Nellie, once the light of their lives, is gone. Abigail reflects on how Nellie often seemed like an outsider in their home, finding her place where she could. Yet there were moments of connection, silent embraces where nothing was said, but everything was understood. Now, in her absence, Abigail feels consumed by grief. She does not attend church anymore, finding no comfort in the promise of a better world to come. Instead, she simply exists, carrying her sorrow like a second skin. One day she tells Dyer that she wishes to purchase an atlas. It is an unusual request, one that catches him off guard. He suggests she could spend her saved money on something else, perhaps a gift for him. But Abigail knows there is no better gift than knowledge, an escape from the dull repetition of farm life. Her self-education is her only refuge, the only thing that keeps her from being swallowed whole by unhappiness. Then, on an ordinary day, a change arrives in the form of a woman named Tallie. Tallie comes unannounced, her presence unexpected but strangely welcome. She explains that she needed to get away for the day. Her husband, Finney, is slaughtering hogs, and she could not bear to be there. Abigail invites her inside, and Tallie eagerly accepts, though she jokes about staying outside and shivering instead. There is an ease between them, an immediate understanding that surprises Abigail, who has always struggled with social interactions. Tallie is different. She is lively, uninhibited, and effortlessly engaging. Abigail watches her, noticing the way the winter sunlight catches the hues of rose and violet in her skin, so striking that she has to look away. She finds herself drawn to Tallie in a way she cannot fully comprehend. As they talk, Tallie admits that her husband speaks with perpetual asperity, and Abigail recognizes something of her own marriage in that statement. They joke about how their mothers once assured them that having children would resolve all woes. Yet, here they are, both childless, both carrying their own unspoken burdens. The conversation takes a heavier turn as Abigail shares something deeply personal. Her daughter Nellie would have been 5 today. Tallie immediately understands the weight of the confession. She does not offer empty platitudes. Instead, she simply listens, acknowledging the loss without diminishing it. Abigail appreciates this more than she can express. Just as their conversation deepens, Dyer arrives home, introducing himself to Tallie. The moment is brief, but it signals a shift. Abigail and Tallie are no longer merely two women passing time together. They are something more, though neither of them yet knows what. After Tallie leaves, Abigail reflects on the encounter. Meeting her has made her day, and when Tallie expresses surprise at that notion, Abigail finds herself smiling. How rare it is to meet someone who can change the course of an entire afternoon. As February progresses, Dyer falls ill with a fever that keeps him bedridden for 3 nights. Abigail tends to him diligently, administering home remedies, an enema of molasses, warm water, and lard, with a drop of turpentine near his nose to help him breathe. Despite his condition, he jokes that he should get sick more often if it means his wife will smile at him. She warns him not to die, and he promises he has no intention of doing so. Their marriage is built on practicality, on duty, but in moments like these, there is an undeniable tenderness buried beneath the surface. In between caring for Dyer, Abigail finds her thoughts returning to Tallie. She replays their conversation, the way they compared childhood beds, Abigail's always thinning out, Tallie's as hard as the Pharaoh's heart. Their words were simple, but their meaning ran deeper. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection that Abigail cannot ignore. When they meet again, Tallie asks about how Abigail and Dyer came to be married. Abigail explains that he was the eldest son of a neighbor and helped out on her father's farm. Tallie teases that Dyer must have been instantly smitten with her, and Abigail hesitates before admitting that he admired her practical good sense. Tallie, however, refuses to accept such a dull answer. Surely there was more to it than that. But was there? Abigail wonders. She had always been valued for her efficiency, her handy ways, her ability to maintain order. She had never been praised for passion or beauty or charm. Dyer, though kind in his own way, had always been a man of function. He appreciated mechanical things, systems that worked efficiently. Perhaps, Abigail thinks, he would have been happier had he been allowed to pursue the natural scientific curiosity of his mind. As she reflects on this, she cannot help but notice how different Tallie is, how free she seems, how much warmth she radiates. And in that warmth, Abigail feels something stir within her, something long dormant, something she never thought she would feel again. And so, with the winter still stretching on and the weight of grief still pressing down, a new presence has entered Abigail's life, a presence that makes her days feel a little less lonely, a little less bleak. A presence that she is beginning to realize she craves more than she ever expected. As the days pass, Abigail finds herself drawn even closer to Tallie. Their conversations feel like a secret world only they understand. But outside that world, life continues, full of obligations, expectations, and the weight of unspoken thoughts. Tuesday, February 19th. Abigail notices how distant her husband Dyer has become. It's not just that he has always been quiet. Now there is something else, an awkwardness, a shame. They don't talk about it, but she knows why. Her refusal to have another child lingers between them like an invisible wall. It's a refusal she cannot explain, but she feels it deep in her bones. That evening, Tallie and her husband Finney come over. The air is filled with the usual pleasantries, but there is an undercurrent of something unspoken. Finney tries to be social, making awkward jokes, but it's clear he doesn't have the warmth that Tallie does. During dinner, the conversation shifts to small-town stories, winter hardships, careless hired hands, and lost letters. But underneath it all, Abigail watches Tallie. She watches the way she smiles, the way she looks at her. And for the first time, she wonders about the bond between Tallie and Finney. There's something strange there, like they are tied together not by love, but by duty. Later, as Abigail writes in her journal, she puts words to her confusion. Finney and Tallie's bond confounds me, she notes. Their relationship is puzzling. Sometimes they seem to be in opposition, other times in quiet understanding. But whatever it is nothing like what she feels when she is with Tallie. Monday, February 25th. Abigail and Tallie spend time together, and their connection deepens. Abigail brings Tallie birthday gifts, a knitted item, an atlas, and a little jar of applesauce with an egg on top. Small things, but full of thought and care. Tallie is delighted, and for a moment there is nothing else but them. But reality is never far away. Tallie speaks of Finney, how he keeps a record of where she goes and how long she stays. Why? Abigail asks. But Tallie doesn't know. She's given up trying to understand his peculiar ways. She admits that he's become more watchful, more controlling, especially because she has yet to give him a child. Then she asks Abigail something that makes her heart ache. What does it feel like? She means pregnancy, motherhood. Abigail hesitates before answering. It was strange at first, just small movements like butterfly wings. Later, like a rabbit kicking. But there is fear too, the fear of having none of it, the fear of birth itself. Tallie listens, then whispers, "It frightens me." Abigail reaches out, reassuring her, "When the time comes, I will be there to guide you through it." They don't speak of Finney anymore. They just sit in the warmth of each other's presence, as if that is all that matters. But when Tallie returns home, Finney is waiting. He notices the gifts from Abigail. The moment is tense, unspoken words filling the space between them. "She left hours ago," Tallie says, but Finney isn't convinced. He doesn't say anything, but the look in his eyes is unsettling. The great storm. It begins like a low groaning from the northeast, the sound of wind like a locomotive approaching from the distance. Then it arrives, roaring, relentless. Snow piles up, swallowing the land. The storm rages for days, cutting people off from one another. Abigail worries. How long before she hears from Tallie? How long before she knows if she is safe? The waiting is unbearable. She keeps busy, tending to the animals. The cows need feeding, but she knows the food won't last long. The chickens suffer too. Half of them don't survive the cold. She digs ice from their mouths, hoping to revive them, but it's too late. The storm takes what it wants. Then, finally, news arrives. Widow Weldon's son, who delivers mail on skis, reports that Tallie made it home safely. But there is more. He mentions frostbite. Abigail's heart clenches. She needs to see Tallie. Thursday, April 10th. Spring comes slowly, bringing damp air and smoky skies. Abigail longs for Tallie's arrival, but time stretches endlessly. She reminds herself, time and the needle wear through the longest morning. Then, finally, she sees her. Tallie steps through the door, and in an instant, everything feels right again. Abigail's heart flutters, like a leaf carried by rushing water. Saturday, April 12th. They sit together, wrapped in warmth and quiet joy. Abigail takes note of the day in her journal. "I spent the last 2 days. Very damp, cloudy, and cool. The world outside remains uncertain, filled with hardship and unspoken rules. But inside this moment, with Tallie beside her, Abigail feels safe. She doesn't know how long this will last, but for now, she lets herself believe in it." The days were moving forward, bringing with them the soft stirrings of spring, but the air between Abigail and Tallie was filled with something far more delicate than the season itself. Their connection was deepening, turning into something neither of them could quite name, but both could feel. Abigail had spent years living a quiet, predictable life. Her husband, Finney, was a man of patience, always speaking of moving west, though she was never certain he would truly go through with it. Tallie, on the other hand, carried a different kind of energy, like the wind that rushes in just before a storm. She arrived later than usual one day without any explanation, and Abigail noticed something in her eyes. It was as if Tallie had been somewhere far away, even though her feet had just stepped onto the farm. Abigail felt drawn to Tallie's world, to the way she thought, the way she spoke about life. There was a certain sadness in her words when she mentioned her childhood. It hadn't been joyful, but she had found ways to make herself happy. Tallie spoke of the women who had come before them, those who had built homes in the wilderness with nothing but courage and hope. Perhaps, she wondered, they had something that modern women did not, an unshakable belief that the future would be better. The days continued, their friendship becoming something sacred, something they both held gently between them. Abigail found herself thinking about Tallie more than she should, more than she had ever thought about anyone before. She noticed how Tallie smiled, how her eyes lit up when she spoke of ideas that excited her. She noticed how the world felt less dull in Tallie's presence, how even the simplest conversations became something precious. There were moments that felt almost too big for words. One day, as they sat together, Tallie admitted that every morning she woke up thinking she never wanted to be far from Abigail. It was a bold thing to say, and Abigail felt warmth rush through her, something unfamiliar yet comforting. Tallie had even written a poem, something about a heart that was both sick and miserable. Abigail laughed at the dramatic nature of it, but inside she understood. She had spent so much of her life believing that joy came from doing what was expected, from following the path laid out for her. But here, with Tallie, there was a different kind of joy, one that came from being seen, truly seen. They spoke of dreams, of the things they had once hoped for. Abigail had always imagined a great moment of triumph, a time when her efforts would be recognized and she would feel complete. Tallie wondered if such a moment had simply not arrived yet, but Abigail wasn't sure. Maybe it already had. Maybe it was sitting right there in front of her. There were stolen moments, brief and fleeting, a glance held too long, a hand brushing against another, a hesitation followed by something unspoken but understood. Abigail felt herself drawn into this quiet pull, but she was afraid. She had been taught that love looked a certain way, that it followed a clear set of rules. And yet, here she was, feeling something so much stronger than anything she had ever known, and it did not follow any rules at all. She struggled to put it into words, and when Tallie asked her to try, she found herself grasping at air. But still, she tried. She spoke of how their connection left nothing else to want or seek, how it filled every empty space she had never even realized existed. And then, just as quickly, she pulled back. Maybe she had presumed too much. Maybe she had read too deeply into something that wasn't truly there. Tallie, however, did not seem to think so. She believed that feelings were not always as simple as they appeared. Just because someone did not speak of their emotions did not mean they did not feel them deeply. And Abigail knew that was true. She had spent her entire life not speaking of things, pretending they did not exist, yet feeling them all the same. She wanted to close the space between them, but fear kept her frozen. She worried that Tallie would catch her cold, that she would regret being too close. But then Tallie leaned in, and suddenly, everything was different. Abigail noticed the scent of biscuits on her, warm and familiar, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself be held in a moment rather than thinking ahead to what came next. And then it was over. Tallie had to go home. Abigail watched her leave, and in her heart she felt two things at once: astonishment and joy. Astonishment at how easily Tallie had stepped into her life and changed it. Joy at the fact that, for now, she was still here. But outside of this small world they had built, life continued as usual. Abigail's husband spoke of troubling news, of men who had been beaten by strangers, of women who had been poisoned by their own husbands. The world was not kind, and it had never been kind to women who stepped out of line. Abigail listened to his words, and something inside her ached. She thought of Tallie, of her own marriage, of the silent battles she had fought within herself. Tallie admitted that she too had her own struggles. Her husband had made his expectations clear, and she had refused. He had accepted her answer, but what did that truly mean? She did not know, and neither did Abigail. Yet, even in the midst of this uncertainty, they still found lightness. Tallie shared another poem, this one about flowers and ants. Abigail teased her about the rhyme, and for a moment the weight of the world lifted. But beneath the laughter, there was something else. Abigail had noticed how Tallie would sometimes draw close, only to retreat again. It was like a bird hovering just outside an open door, uncertain if it was safe to step inside. Tallie denied that was how she felt, but Abigail could not shake the thought. She thought back to a play she had once read in school, where a king and his daughter were imprisoned together but found comfort in their shared captivity. It was a strange idea, being trapped, yet finding happiness within it. But Tallie didn't see it that way. She had never liked cages. And Abigail? She wasn't sure. But if being with Tallie meant being in a cage, she thought, perhaps for the first time in her life, it was a cage she would not mind. Abigail was restless. The house felt too big, too empty, too full of thoughts she couldn't quiet. Dyer had been silent all day, which was a relief. At least she didn't have to answer his questions. But that didn't mean her mind was quiet. No, her mind was filled with only one thought: Tallie. Days had passed and Tallie had not come. No visits, no notes, nothing. It was like she had disappeared into the wind. At first, Abigail told herself to be patient. Maybe Tallie was busy. Maybe she wasn't feeling well. Maybe she had visitors of her own. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Then, finally, there she was. Tallie arrived with Finny, riding in their wagon like nothing had happened. Abigail's heart leapt, but she had to stay calm, to pretend that everything was just as it should be. Finny greeted them, loud and full of himself as always. He and Dyer made plans for another dinner. Abigail wanted to protest, to say that it should be their turn to host. But Finny insisted, and there was no arguing with him. The dinner was stiff, cold. The men talked about work, about farming, about the land and the tools they used. Dyer listened with interest, nodding along as Finny boasted about his methods, his skills, his discipline. He told a story that made Abigail's stomach turn. A story about punishing a barking dog, about freezing it in the middle of a storm until it died. The way he spoke about it, as if it were just another lesson learned, made Abigail shudder. She looked at Tallie, searching for some reaction, some sign of outrage. But Tallie was still, too still. And then Abigail saw it, a mark on Tallie's neck, a bruise, dark and spreading. Panic rose in her chest. What had happened? Who had hurt her? She tried to catch her eye, but Tallie looked away, keeping her gaze down. She didn't answer, didn't explain. Abigail wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Not here, not now. The dinner ended and they went home. But Abigail couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressed down on her. The next morning, she told herself she would go to Tallie's house, that she would demand answers. But she never got the chance. Because when she arrived, the house was empty. Gone. Everything. The wagon, the animals, the tools, everything was gone. There was no sign of Tallie, no sign of Finny, just an empty shell of a home, abandoned overnight. Abigail's heart pounded. She ran toward the house looking for something, anything, that could tell her where they had gone. And then she saw it. Blood. A small stain, dried and dark near the door. Panic turned into terror. She ran back home, breathless, shaking. Dyer was outside, tending to the horses, and she barely managed to get the words out. They were gone, vanished, and there was blood. Dyer frowned, but he didn't seem surprised. They moved, he said simply, as if that was all there was to it. But Abigail knew better. This wasn't just moving. This was something else. Something darker. "We need to call the sheriff," she said. Dyer shook his head. "And tell him what? That a family packed up and left?" "There was blood, Dyer." Her voice was shaking now. "Something happened." Dyer sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I'll ask around," he finally said. "See if anyone knows anything. But if we don't find anything, you need to let it go." Abigail nodded, but she knew. She knew she would never let it go. Friday, July 25th. The weight of Tallie's words clung to Abigail's mind like a fog, thick and inescapable. The letter was proof of what she had feared. Tallie had been forced away, trapped in a place where love was a whisper drowned by duty. Finney's control over her was absolute, and Abigail's helplessness burned like a wound that would not close. She read the letter again, tracing each word with her fingers, as if touching the ink could somehow bridge the miles between them. Tallie's misery bled through every line, and yet she had tried to soften it, to give Abigail hope. But hope felt like a cruel joke when there were 85 miles of wilderness and Finney's shadow standing between them. Monday, July 28th. Dyer caught her reading the letter again. He did not need to say anything. His expression carried enough weight. Disappointment, irritation, perhaps even pity. He believed she was mourning a friendship. He believed she would move on. But he was wrong. "You must let it go," he said that evening after a silent dinner. Abigail did not answer. Letting go was not an option. Wednesday, July 30th. A storm raged outside, wind howling through the trees, rattling the house with its restless fury. Abigail sat by the window, candlelight flickering against the pages of her journal. She wrote to Tallie, though she had no way of sending the letter. She wrote of the storm, of how it felt as if the world itself was echoing her turmoil. She wrote of the love she had no words to name, of the loneliness that grew deeper with every passing day. Dyer watched her, sighed, then left the room. He had stopped trying to reason with her. Monday, August 4th. She had to do something. Abigail had spent the last week mapping out possible routes, calculating how far she could travel in a day, considering what provisions she would need. She had no illusions of an easy journey. 85 miles through unfamiliar terrain was daunting. But Tallie was waiting, and Abigail could not let her remain in that prison of silence and expectation. Tuesday, August 5th. A chance came in the form of a travelling merchant, a man who passed through once a month, selling fabrics and tools. Abigail had spoken to him before, learned that he often journeyed northward. When she approached him, her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "How far do you travel this time?" she asked. "As far as Syracuse," he replied. Her heart pounded. "Could you take me as far as Onondaga County?" He studied her, frowning. "That's a long way for a woman alone." "I can pay," she said quickly, pressing coins into his palm before he could object. He hesitated, but then nodded. "We leave at dawn, if you're certain." She was. Wednesday, August 6th. Abigail packed lightly, a small satchel with food, water, and the only dress she could carry. The letter from Tallie was tucked close to her chest, as if it could serve as a beacon to guide her. As she stepped onto the wagon, she glanced back at the house. She felt no remorse, no hesitation. Dyer would wake to an empty home, to questions without answers. Perhaps he would search for her, or perhaps he would simply let her go, relieved to be free of her silent grief. As the wagon rolled forward, the wind carried away the last traces of the life she was leaving behind. Ahead, the road stretched toward Tallie, toward freedom, toward love. Abigail had fought so hard, holding on to hope like a candle in the wind, but now all she had was silence. The long journey, the aching muscles, the restless nights, they had all led her to this terrible moment. Tallie was gone. The sickness had taken her, stolen her away like a thief in the night, leaving nothing behind except words on old, crumpled pages and memories that hurt too much to touch. For days, Abigail didn't know what to do with herself. Her hands moved through chores like a ghost slipping through walls. She cleaned, she cooked, she worked the land, but her mind was elsewhere, always elsewhere. She thought about the home they had imagined together, a place where the world would not press in so harshly, where love could bloom without fear. But it had never been real. It had only existed in whispers, in hurried glances, in secret touches. And now even that had been taken away. Dyer tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if Abigail would come back to him eventually. He spoke about gratitude, about the farm, about the future. He still believed in a life where they could move forward, but Abigail only listened in silence. How could she explain that her heart no longer lived in the same world as his? Every night, when she lay down to sleep, she felt the weight of all she had lost pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She found herself growing colder, harder. The world had taken everything from her, and she wasn't sure she had anything left to give. She filled her days with work, mending fences, baking bread, preserving apples for the winter. Anything to keep her hands busy. Anything to keep her from sinking into the emptiness inside her. She cut her hand on a paring knife one afternoon, and instead of crying out, she simply watched the blood pool in her palm, fascinated by the way it dripped onto the wooden table. Pain felt different now, less like something to avoid, and more like something she deserved. Some nights, Dyer would take her hand, leading her up the hills where they could see the wide, open land stretching far beyond their farm. He would talk about the past, trying to remember the way they once were, but Abigail couldn't pretend. She could only stand there, lost in her own world, thinking about Tallie, about the life that had been stolen from them both. She pictured her friend Nellie, imagined her brushing Tallie's hair with slow, gentle strokes. She liked to think that somewhere, somehow, they were together, safe, happy. But Abigail was not safe. She was not happy. She was burning, and she didn't know how to put the fire out. The more she thought about Finney, the more she felt something dark curling inside her. He had done this. He had taken Tallie away, locked her in a life that drained her spirit, and then let her waste away in loneliness and illness. He had been cruel, and now he lived without consequences, while Abigail was left to suffer alone. She dreamed of justice. No, not justice. Revenge. She imagined waiting for the right moment, following Dyer into town, finding Finney and ending him right where he sat. The thought gave her a strange kind of comfort, a purpose where there had been none. She held on to it like a secret, something that kept her upright when everything else felt like it was collapsing. And yet, despite all of this, there was a part of her that still wrote in her ledger, still held onto the pieces of her old self, still tried to believe in something other than pain. She wrote about the wind, about the changing seasons, about the things that remained when everything else had been taken. She told herself stories about the life she and Tallie might have had if they had been born in a different world, a kinder one. She knew she could never have it, but sometimes just imagining it was enough to keep her breathing. Dyer saw the change in her. He saw the way her hands clenched into fists when she thought no one was watching, the way her eyes were always looking beyond him, searching for something he couldn't give. One night, he asked her what more they could do for each other, as if he still believed they could fix this, that they could find their way back to some version of happiness. But Abigail knew better. There was no way back. There was only forward. And forward meant facing a world without Tallie, without the love that had once made her feel alive. She told him that if he couldn't see that, then maybe he had forgotten how to imagine at all. And so she kept writing, she kept dreaming, and she kept waiting for what she did not yet know. And that's The World to Come. A haunting reminder that love stories aren't always about happy endings, but about the moments that change us forever. If this recap moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content that explores stories just like this one. See you again here on Sapphic Nook.